Welcome to the Dream Novel channel. Before starting to listen to the fun in this clip, don't forget to like and comment, so that the admin will have the encouragement to continue making clips. Let's go listen. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 41, Potions Class. When the door to the hospital wing finally opened again, it marked Michael's official discharge. He had at last fulfilled his wish to escape, but his current state left much to be desired. His footsteps were unsteady, and he was constantly retching, looking far from well. Kyle, standing nearby, had never thought it possible for a person's face to turn blue, but here was Mikkel, proving him wrong. Even the boldest portraits in Hogwarts hadn't dared to paint their subjects in such a shade. Michael's entire head was blue, his forehead, nose, lips, and even his hair and teeth shared the same alarming color. From a distance, he resembled a large, blue dandelion. "Kyle," Mikkel croaked, extending a shaky hand. "What are you smiling about? Help me up." "Nothing, just thinking about something happy," Kyle replied, stepping forward to assist Mikkel while making a conscious effort to avoid looking at his face. "I added 20 points to Hufflepuff yesterday." "That is something to be happy about," Mikkel nodded, deciding not to ask any further questions. He wasn't in the mood for conversation. Whatever Madame Pomfrey had poured down his throat had left a burning sensation, and his voice felt raw. They began the slow walk toward the underground potions classroom. As they crossed the courtyard by the pendulum clock, Michael's blue complexion gradually faded, returning to a more normal hue. Although his appearance wasn't fully restored, the dim lighting of the castle masked most of it. Kyle realized that Madame Pomfrey hadn't intended for Mikkel to embarrass himself too badly in public. Despite their steady pace, Michael's sluggish walking meant that by the time they reached the classroom, they were late. Snape had just finished calling roll when his eyes landed on them standing at the doorway. "Late to your first lesson? Are the new students this year all so incompetent?" Snape's voice dripped with disdain. 10 points from Hufflepuff. Michael's eyes widened in recognition as he stared at Snape. Without thinking, he blurted out, "Huh. You're the one who..." But before Mikkel could finish, Kyle reacted quickly, delivering a swift nudge to his back, cutting him off mid-sentence. A catastrophe was narrowly avoided. Kyle seized the moment. "Sorry, Professor Snape, it won't happen again." Snape's cold gaze lingered on them. "Humph, if there is a second time, it won't be as simple as deducting 10 points. Now, why are you still standing there? Get to your seats." 5 more points from Hufflepuff. Not wanting to risk Mikkel saying anything else that might get them into even more trouble, Kyle hurriedly pulled him to an empty table at the back of the room. Snape returned his focus to the class, his voice softening into a more ominous tone. "Potions is a profound and important subject. I don't expect you will really understand the beauty of the softly simmering cauldron with its shimmering fumes, the delicate power of liquids that creep through human veins, bewitching the mind, and snaring the senses. Nor do I expect you to understand the miraculous transformations that occur when common ingredients are slowly elevated into something greater." He continued, his voice almost gentle now. "I can teach you how to bottle fame, brew glory, even stopper death, if you aren't as big a bunch of dunderheads as I usually have to teach." Snape's words cast a heavy silence over the room. The Slytherins, heads held high, sat straighter, eager to prove they were not among the fools Snape referenced. In stark contrast, the Hufflepuffs exchanged uneasy glances, afraid to meet their professor's eyes. Mikkel, in particular, looked like he wished he could disappear beneath the table. His face, although no longer blue, had paled considerably. But there was no avoiding it, what was coming, and they could only brace themselves for Snape's inevitable scrutiny. "Mr. Derrick." Snape's sharp voice suddenly rang out. "For the preparation of a boil cure potion, do you add the stewed horned slugs or the porcupine quills first?" Mikkel stared up at Snape, his face blank. "Boil cure potion?" He carefully ventured, "The porcupine quills, Professor." "Tisk," Snape scoffed, his tone dripping with disdain. If you had even glanced at your textbook before the start of term, you would know that the first ingredient for a boil cure potion is powdered snake fangs, not porcupine quills. How dare you come late with such an appalling lack of preparation? Hufflepuff loses another point. A chorus of scribbling immediately filled the room as students scrambled to take notes. Open your books to page 1. Snape commanded, returning to the podium. Today, we will be learning how to brew a basic boil cure potion. Although it is simple enough that anyone with the intelligence of a troll should manage it, I remind you to be cautious, unless you wish to cover yourself in painful boils. He continued, the ingredients for this potion are in the storage cupboard. Work in pairs. Oh, wait. Snape paused, his eyes narrowing as he approached Mikkel again. Given your current state, Mr. Derek, and for the safety of everyone else, I believe it's best if you sit this one out. Snape removed the cauldron from Michael's desk, sneering slightly. No need for you to wave your wand around incompetently today. Then, turning to Kyle, Snape ordered, you, team up with Miss Prince. And don't bother Derek while he's reading. In the crowd, Kanna looked up in disbelief. Her face went blank as she watched Kyle make his way over to her. She had been so busy trying to avoid Kyle earlier that she ended up sitting alone, while everyone else had already formed pairs. Now, there was nowhere left to hide. Maybe I could switch places with someone else. Kanna thought, eyeing her roommate behind her. Just as she was about to suggest switching, Snape's voice cut through the air once more from the lectern. What are you waiting for? Shall I brew the potion for you? Snape snapped angrily, causing the entire class to bustle into action. With no choice left, Kanna sighed and resigned herself to her situation. She watched her roommate rush to the cupboard to gather ingredients while she stayed at the table, already grinding the snake fangs that had been left in front of her. Earlier, when Snape had passed by her desk, he had casually placed a small bag of ingredients on it. Curiously, there were 3 times more than she needed, meaning Kanna didn't have to go to the cupboard like the others. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 42, Potion Fountain. Kyle had never expected Kanna to be so skilled at potion making. Every step, from boiling the nettle solution to grinding the snake's teeth, was executed with precision. He found himself unable to contribute much and sat idly by, watching the cauldron with growing boredom. Unlike the other young wizards who were flustered and rushing around, Kyle appeared to be on a break. There really wasn't much for him to help with, as potions, like many other classes, involved more waiting than practical work. Most of the time, they simply waited for the potions to brew, much like preparing a soup, 10 minutes of preparation followed by 2 hours of simmering. That was assuming everything went smoothly, of course. For some students, creating a basic nettle infusion could turn into a drawn-out struggle. Take the 2 Slytherin first years on their left, for example. They had already gone to fetch nettles from the storage cupboard 7 times, which earned them several disapproving glares from Professor Snape. Kyle watched as one of them stood up to go to the cupboard again. Great, 8 times. Flada, Walker, use your brains for once, Snape finally snapped, his cold gaze fixed on them. If you don't produce a proper yellow-green solution this time, I'll put your heads in the cauldron. The 2 Slytherin students were dumbstruck, especially the unlucky one heading back to get more nettles. He looked like he was walking to his doom. After glaring at them, Snape dramatically swept his robes aside and moved on to another pair of unfortunate students. What is this, licorice syrup? Pour it out and start over, he barked. It's not yellow enough, pour it out and start again. Pour it out. Snape prowled around the classroom like a menacing bat, leaving a trail of misery in his wake. Wherever he went, there were cries of anguish. The repeated instructions to pour it away and start over had everyone on edge, making them more cautious with their potions. Yet, Kyle remained unfazed. He kept his focus on the cauldron, waiting for the solution to shift from yellow-green to pale yellow before reducing the flame to its lowest setting. At the same time, Kanna successfully added the ground snake tooth powder to the mixture. A sweet but unpleasant odor soon wafted from the cauldron. "Perfect," Kyle said with a nod, turning the heat back up. Now came the long wait once more. Kyle glanced over at Kanna, curiosity getting the better of him. "Did you brew potions before coming to school?" "No," Kanna replied, taken aback. She shook her head. "Why do you ask?" "You seem really talented in potions," Kyle remarked. "Usually, when first-year students start brewing, it's a disaster. Sometimes, the cauldrons even explode." "That's impossible," Kanna said skeptically. Kyle didn't press the matter, merely gesturing for her to look around. Kanna, puzzled, glanced up and finally noticed the chaotic state of the potions classroom. Young witches and wizards were darting between cauldrons and storage cabinets, their once tidy robes now torn and disheveled. Some even had smoke rising from their hair. If someone were to walk in at that moment, they might think an exploding charm had gone off. Thick, multicolored smoke drifted above many of the cauldrons, slowly merging into a strange gray-brown cloud near the ceiling. The air was filled with a peculiar odor, part rotten eggs, part burning wool. Kanna only needed a second or two of breathing it in before her stomach began to churn. She muttered to herself, "How is this possible? Potions are so simple." Her gaze shifted toward the Slytherin side of the room. They were all purebloods, and with Snape as their head of house, surely they'd be fine. Just as she thought that, she witnessed something unforgettable. The cauldron at the table next to hers exploded. No, not the cauldron itself, the potion inside it did. Without warning, the liquid began to foam violently and expand at an alarming rate, filling the cauldron within moments. But that wasn't the worst part. In the next second, foam erupted from the cauldron, shooting straight up and hitting the ceiling with force. The scene was nothing short of spectacular. "Flada! Walker! You two idiots!" Snape's furious voice rang out, though he didn't immediately punish the two culprits. His professor's instincts kicked in, and he swiftly drew his wand to contain the bubbling disaster. Tergio. Scourgify. Under Snape's charm, the cauldron and foam were quickly cleaned up. After confirming that no students had been harmed, Snape stormed over to the two Slytherin first years. He didn't bother scolding them or deducting points. Instead, he grabbed them by their collars and unceremoniously threw them out of the potions classroom. "Get out and find Filch." "Detention," he roared. The room fell into an eerie silence as everyone immediately shut their mouths, making sure not to draw any further attention to themselves. The tension was palpable. Kyle, having little to do, decided to look busy by preparing ingredients in advance. Although this particular step wasn't in magical drafts and potions, Snape required them to make a long slit along the side of the porcupine quills, and the slugs had to be boiled beforehand. The exact reason was never explained, but when Ryan had been bold enough to ask, he was docked 3 points for his curiosity. Since then, no one else had dared to question the instructions. Kyle took out a bag of ingredients and selected a porcupine quill that looked suitable. Wanting to pass the time, he cut it extremely slowly, taking over 10 minutes to slice through a quill that was less than 30 centimeters long. His obvious attempt at dragging things out, however, didn't go unnoticed. Snape appeared silently beside him, like a shadow, picking up one of the quills from Kyle's table. He examined the uneven cut before sneering. "I recall instructing you to cut a straight line. What is this? A dried flobberworm caterpillar? Or do you simply not understand what straight line means?" Kyle blinked, caught off guard. He glanced at Snape, then down at the porcupine quill in his hand, which he hadn't yet finished cutting. It looked fine to him. Had he forgotten what he'd done? Or maybe Snape had deliberately picked up someone else's quill just to find a reason to scold him. That didn't seem likely, though. While Snape had a reputation for being ruthless when it came to deducting points, this level of pettiness seemed out of character, especially considering Kyle's last name wasn't Potter. Before Kyle could say anything, Kanna, who had been standing next to him, timidly raised her hand. Her voice wavered, on the verge of tears. "Professor. I cut that one," she admitted shakily. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 43, Major Event at Hogwarts. "It doesn't matter who it is, Miss Prince." Snape's expression remained unchanged as he frowned. Irregular cut marks might improve the effect in some potions, but this is just a boil's potion. Doing it here is a complete waste of time. However, given your serious attitude, 5 points to Hufflepuff. The entire class froze in shock, eyes wide in disbelief. Some Hufflepuff students even patted their ears, as if doubting their own hearing. It was only halfway through the lesson, but everyone had already witnessed firsthand the infamous cruelty of the potions professor. As the prefects had warned, in Snape's class, the only students who earned extra points were the Slytherins. The other houses merely hoped to escape without losing any. Take the 2 Slytherins who had nearly blown up the classroom earlier. While Snape had furiously assigned them detention in the dungeon, he hadn't deducted a single point from their house. And yet, here they were, hearing him award points to Conna, a Hufflepuff. Snape actually gave her 5 points. The shock was palpable. This incident would surely become the talk of the entire school. If Hufflepuff was stunned, Slytherin was outright indignant. The Slytherins exchanged resentful glances, almost on the verge of crying out in frustration. Why? They wondered. They were the ones who typically earned extra points. Why should a Hufflepuff benefit now? Their head of house had changed. He hadn't been like this before. But Snape, indifferent to the turmoil around him, simply placed the porcupine quill back on the table. "Don't do anything like this again," he said coolly. "Yes, yes. Professor," Conna mumbled meekly. Snape nodded before turning his gaze toward Kyle. His expression twisted into one of instant disgust. "Look at the others, and then look at you. It's taken you this long to cut a single quill, and you can't even manage that properly. What a waste of time." 5 points from Hufflepuff. Kyle was left speechless. What just happened? Who did I offend? He had been cutting slowly, sure, but 5 points deducted for that? Where's the justice in this school? Is there any humanity left? Snape's blatant double standards were maddening, and it seemed that no one at Hogwarts would intervene. Even the other students in the classroom didn't seem too concerned about Kyle's plight. Most let out a collective sigh of relief, while the Slytherins hugged each other in joy. He's back. This was the Snape they knew. The professor who had just awarded points to Conna had to have been some sort of imposter. Maybe, just maybe, Professor Dumbledore himself hadn't wanted Slytherin to win the House Cup for the 6th year in a row and had secretly controlled Snape with the Imperious Curse. That damned old honeybee. The Slytherins comforted themselves with this thought. After that, Snape rarely ventured near Kyle's workbench again. It wasn't until the end of class that he began his usual inspection of the potions brewed by the students. As expected, Kyle and Conna's Boil Cure potion was a resounding success. Pink smoke gently wafted from their cauldron, and even Snape, with his famously critical eye, couldn't find a single flaw. 5 points to Hufflepuff, Snape muttered, glancing at Kyle with disdain before walking away. Though he had quickly reclaimed those 5 points earlier in class, the fact that Snape had awarded points to Hufflepuff twice in one lesson caused a stir at Hogwarts. By dinner, the news had spread like wildfire, and once again, Conna became the topic of conversation. This time, it wasn't just a few first-years gossiping about the remarkable events in Transfiguration class, nearly the entire school was buzzing with curiosity. Who was this first-year witch who had managed to catch Snape's attention in such a dramatic way? As Kyle sat down to dinner, Fred and George Weasley risked detention by sneaking over to the Hufflepuff table, looking far worse for wear. Dark circles under their eyes, they struggled to hold their cutlery steady, their hands shaking as they attempted to cut into their pork chops. "Thank goodness, Kyle, you've finally come out of that cursed common room," Fred greeted him, looking exhausted. Kyle took in the twins' haggard appearances with concern. "What's wrong with you two? You're young, but you still need to be careful. If you keep going at this pace, your bodies won't hold up." George groaned. "You have no idea how bad this detention was. Do you know how thick that book was? It was 15 inches tall, taller than a wand. And McGonagall wants us to copy the entire thing in a week. I swear she's trying to kill us." Fred gave his brother a pat on the shoulder. "At least, until we finish copying that wretched book, McGonagall won't let us die of exhaustion." Kyle wisely chose not to ask what might happen after they finished the task. Suddenly, George slapped his forehead. "Oh, right. You distracted me. I almost forgot why we came over." He scanned the Hufflepuff table. "So, who's the hero named Conna? Introduce us, I'm waiting for her autograph." Fred nodded eagerly. Yeah. A Hufflepuff who can actually score 10 points from Snape is practically a miracle." George grinned. "Dumbledore should give her a special contribution award for curing Snape's bias. That's a far greater achievement than anything written in that stupid book." Kyle shook his head with a shrug. "If you're looking for Conna, you'll be disappointed. She didn't come to the Great Hall for dinner today." George raised his eyebrows in surprise. "She's not eating." "Not in the hall," Kyle explained, giving him a strange look. "Don't forget, our common room is next to the kitchen. She can get whatever she wants whenever she feels like it." "Oh, right," George said, slapping his forehead again. "How could I forget that? There's so much swirling around in my head right now, it's messing with my brain." Fred sighed, shaking his head. "Guess we're not getting any autographs today. Shame we've got detention again tonight. Waiting in the kitchen would have been a good idea otherwise." Kyle opened his mouth to suggest that Conna probably wouldn't want to give them autographs anyway, but he thought better of it and stayed quiet. With their hopes dashed, Fred and George quickly stuffed a few more bites of food into their mouths before heading out. On their way, they filled their pockets with baked potatoes, muttering something about needing them after their grueling detention. Kyle, puzzled, asked why they didn't just go to the kitchen later for something warm. Fred shot him a pained look. 2 in the morning. He said mournfully, "It'll be a miracle if we can even walk back to the dormitory alive." Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 44, Chomping Cabbage. The third day of Hogwarts was likely the most anticipated day of the year for new Hufflepuff students. Not only was it a Friday, but it also featured the classes they were most excited about. In the morning, they had herbology with Professor Sprout, and in the afternoon, defense against the dark arts and flying lessons. Early that morning, the students gathered outside the greenhouse along with Gryffindor. "Good morning, students, and welcome to herbology class," greeted Pomona Sprout, the herbology professor. She was a short, gray-haired witch, and because she spent most of her time in the greenhouse tending to the plants, her clothes were always covered in dust. Compared to the high-ranking headmaster, Professor Sprout looked more like a humble gardener. But she didn't mind. Standing at the entrance to the greenhouse, she carefully surveyed the young wizards before her. "Before we enter the greenhouse, I need to tell you something very important. First of all, the plants grown in the greenhouse are all magical and often dangerous. Even the common Dittany has sharp thorns, so do not touch any plants without my permission. Also, once inside, no loud noises or shouting. I've recently received some new plants that are still acclimating to their environment. Loud sounds might upset them. Do you all understand?" "Yes," everyone replied in unison. "Very good," Professor Sprout nodded. Once inside, she arranged everyone on the left side of the greenhouse, leaving the right side completely empty. In fact, even without her doing so, none of the students would have ventured over there. "Professor, what are those things?" a first-year Gryffindor asked, his face pale with fear as he stared at the strange yellow plants on the opposite side. "By Merlin's beard." It was the first time he had seen cabbages with sharp teeth, and their mouths were nearly as big as his head. Just thinking about getting bitten made him shuffle further back. "Chomping cabbages," Professor Sprout said with a casual air. "You'd best keep your distance. But don't be too nervous. They might look frightening, but they're well behaved as long as you don't provoke them. And in a few days, they'll be moved to a larger greenhouse, so you won't see them next time you come to class." "All right, let's get started," she clapped her hands. "Turn to page 1 in your books. Today, we'll be learning about Dittany. Does anyone know what Dittany is?" If you ignored the terrifying chomping cabbages, the herbology class was practically perfect. Professor Sprout's deep knowledge of magical plants, combined with her clear explanations and real-life examples, made it easy for the students to learn. By the end of the lesson, nearly everyone could answer her questions flawlessly, which pleased Professor Sprout immensely. She awarded 3 points to each house and handed out fresh Dittany leaves to all the students. Dittany leaves, as Kyle knew, were like the magical world's version of a Band-Aid. He'd used them many times before, and they worked wonders. After cleaning a wound and applying the leaf, the injury would usually heal by the next day. Of course, Dittany leaves were only suitable for minor cuts and scrapes from daily life. For more serious injuries, Dittany essential oil was required. After class, everyone walked out of the greenhouse together. Mikkel spotted Kyle in the crowd and quickly ran up to him, curiosity shining in his eyes. "What were you picking up just now?" Mikkel asked. "What do you mean?" Kyle looked at him suspiciously. "I was just loosening the soil for the Dittany." "I saw everything," Mikkel said firmly. "You ran across the room when Professor Sprout turned around to get a shovel, and you picked something up from under those flower pots." "Oh, that," Kyle said, realizing what Mikkel was talking about. "It's nothing. The professor dropped a bag of fertilizer, so I went to pick it up." "A bag of fertilizer?" Mikkel looked at him skeptically, clearly not convinced. The bag had looked small and light, not at all like something that would have fallen so far. It didn't even seem round enough to roll. "Well, maybe I accidentally kicked it over. I was pretty shocked when I found it," Kyle replied with an exaggerated look of fear. "Those chomping cabbages are terrifying. Honestly, if I wasn't worried about losing points from Professor Sprout, I wouldn't have gone near them." "Is that so?" Michael's doubts began to fade as he listened to Kyle. Nodding, he said, "Those chomping cabbages do look scary. I definitely wouldn't have gone over there if I were you." "Who's to say?" Kyle shrugged. "By the way, did Professor Sprout mention when she'd teach you to control your magic?" "Well, she told me to meet her on Saturday and Sunday mornings," Mikkel said, his voice tinged with frustration. "It's the first weekend at Hogwarts, and I've got to go to class." "There's nothing you can do about it," Kyle said, giving him a sympathetic pat on the shoulder. "You can't keep taking the magic-suppressing potion." At the mention of the potion, Mikkel shuddered and quickly shook his head. "You're right, I'd rather give up weekends forever than drink that stuff again." "Exactly." When they reached the castle, Kyle told Mikkel and Ryan to head back to their dormitory without him. Claiming he was going to the library, he instead made his way straight to the 8th floor. There, he found the tapestry depicting a troll beating up Barnabas the Barmy, the wizard who had foolishly tried to teach 6 trolls how to dance ballet. Judging by the artwork, the trolls had certainly given him a rough time. Satisfied he was in the right place, Kyle took a deep breath and walked back and forth in front of the tapestry 3 times, mentally repeating, "I need a greenhouse for farming." On his 3rd pass, a circular archway appeared on the wall across from the tapestry. Without hesitation, Kyle grabbed the brass handle and pushed open the door. A wave of earthy fragrance greeted him, and though he had been prepared for what might lie ahead, the sight still took his breath away. The room was enormous, almost as big as the Great Hall, with rich soil beneath his feet and a bright sun overhead. Kyle figured it was all some kind of charm. Curious, he whispered, "I need rain." Immediately, a downpour began inside the room, yet the rain fell only on the soil. The magical water seemed to avoid Kyle entirely, leaving him completely dry. "This is incredible," Kyle said, truly amazed. It was, without a doubt, the room of requirement. Using it for storage? What a waste. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 45, Farming and Professor Oren. It felt like finding a long-lost toy. Kyle was having the time of his life in the room of requirement, experimenting with its magic. With just a flick of his fingers, he turned the gentle rain into a fierce blizzard, and with another flick, he conjured hailstones the size of eggs. The power to alter his surroundings with a wave of his hand was exhilarating. After indulging in the magical weather changes for a while, Kyle suddenly remembered he had actual work to do. Reluctantly, he changed the room back to a sunny, serene atmosphere. "Never mind, there'll be plenty of time for this later," he thought. Squatting down on the ground, Kyle carefully pulled 2 fava bean-sized seeds out of his pocket, handling them as if they were made of glass. They were incredibly precious, and, more importantly, they weren't even his. They had come from the herbology class, where he had picked them up. Really, he had just picked them up. Earlier that day, during herbology, a Gryffindor student had been so excited after successfully answering one of Professor Sprout's questions that he accidentally flung the shovel he was holding straight at the chomping cabbage on the other side of the classroom. Predictably, the cabbage had reduced the shovel to a mangled piece of metal in seconds, and the student had been docked a point for his blunder. That would have been the end of it, but Kyle noticed something curious. After spitting out the remains of the destroyed shovel, the chomping cabbage had spat out 2 small seeds. Professor Sprout, busy fetching another shovel at the time, hadn't seen a thing. As a good Hufflepuff, Kyle naturally wanted to help his head of house, so he picked the seeds up for her. But, distracted by the lesson on Dittany, he had completely forgotten about them, until now. Kyle dug 2 small holes in the soil, just the right size for the seeds, and gently placed them inside. After covering them with a thin layer of soil, he stood up and nodded, feeling satisfied with his work. "Very good," he muttered to himself. "I'll keep them here for now, and I'll take them to Professor Sprout next time we have class." After leaving the room of requirement, Kyle returned to the common room before heading to the Defense Against the Dark Arts class with the other Hufflepuff first years for their afternoon lesson. The atmosphere on the way to the classroom was charged with excitement. It was hard to tell whether they were more eager about the lesson itself or curious about the legendary, one-year professor. The Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, located on the 2nd floor, greeted them with a surprise. When they pushed open the door, they noticed that all the desks had been pushed to the walls, leaving the room feeling oddly empty. One-year Professor Oren, their teacher, was already present, standing behind the lectern and fiddling with a cage that was partially covered. Kyle, upon seeing the setup, was a little surprised. He hadn't expected their Defense Against the Dark Arts professor to be a realist like Lupin, preparing practical lessons from day one. "Good afternoon, everyone," Professor Oren greeted them warmly once everyone had gathered inside. "Put away your books. We won't need them, not just for today, but for every lesson in the future." That single sentence won the favor of many young wizards. What could be more delightful than not needing to bring books to class? And not having to bring them to any class? Professor Oren had managed to do both. "This professor must be great," one of the students exclaimed. "He's definitely going to get re-elected." "I hope you're right, Mr. Borg," Professor Oren replied with a smile, "but sadly, I can't give Gryffindor extra points for that." He continued, "In my opinion, theoretical knowledge is the easiest part of this course, and you can learn that on your own, so there's no need to waste valuable class time on it. Instead, I'd rather focus on teaching you how to protect yourself in dangerous situations, whether it's from dark magic or a dangerous magical creature. Either could cost you your life." The room grew a little tense, as the seriousness of the subject settled in. Sensing this, Professor Oren added, "But it's too early for you to learn about dark magic, and the headmaster wouldn't allow it anyway. So we'll start with something simpler, magical creatures." With that, Professor Oren gently nudged the cage, and a low buzzing noise came from inside. The cloth covering it began to tremble, as though whatever was inside might burst out at any moment. Some of the students standing closest to the cage instinctively backed away, startled. "Don't worry," Professor Oren said reassuringly. "This little guy may be dangerous, but as long as I'm here, you won't be harmed. Just stay calm and pay close attention to every word I say." With that, he removed the cloth, revealing the creature inside, a tiny, blue insect, about an inch in size. The buzzing noise came from its rapidly flapping wings, which were situated on top of its head, making it look like it was wearing a little bamboo dragonfly. As it hovered in place, its body rotated slightly, giving it a rather cute appearance. Katie Bell couldn't help but laugh. "Professor, it doesn't seem as dangerous as you said." To her, it was hard to believe this tiny creature posed any real threat. It was so small, she figured she wouldn't even need a wand to swat it away. "Really?" Professor Oren raised an eyebrow, smiling. "I hope you'll feel the same way later, Miss Bell." He turned to the rest of the class. "Now, does anyone know what it is? The first person to name it will earn 5 points for their house." In the midst of the murmuring crowd, Mikkel caught a faint whisper, like the name of the creature. Motivated by the chance for bonus points, he blurted out, "Billywig." "Excellent, Mr. Mikkel," Professor Oren said, clearly pleased. 5 points for Hufflepuff. "That's right, this is a Billywig, a level XXX magical creature," Professor Oren explained. "Take a close look. It has a long, thin stinger at the base of its body. Anyone stung by a Billywig will feel dizzy at first, and then they'll begin to float. If someone is stung multiple times, they may even float uncontrollably for several days." He turned back to Katie Bell. "Now, Miss Bell, do you still think it's not dangerous?" Katie shrugged, saying nothing, but the skeptical look on her face made it clear she wasn't entirely convinced. At this point, another student eagerly asked, "So, Professor, is this lesson going to be about how to deal with this Billywig?" "Not quite," Professor Oren replied with a smile. "First, you need to learn the proper spells for dealing with it. I won't let you face any magical creatures in combat until I'm sure you're ready. Now the fun in this clip is over. Which listeners haven't liked and commented yet? You can press like and comment to encourage the admin find the fun in the next clip. May the listeners be happy forever.